So this led me to Dundon. For installation, you want to go with someone that you obviously trust to tear your car apart and put it back together in a way that's going to hold up. Next, as we pan across, you can see some of the underbody panels and then my whole exhaust system. Rear wing is massive. Dundon actually flew in their pro driver, Ted. Super thankful that they did that. Welcome back to It's Track Time. It's time for an update, folks. After getting Randy in my car early in the summer and getting his feedback on the way it handled, I decided to make some major changes to it. So let's first remind ourselves what Randy said about the way it handled, and then we'll get into the changes.
My best lap was my first lap because the tires were fresh.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially new tires.
Oh no, new tires are...
You gave me a set of
they're
new
magic.
Hoosiers.
Yeah, they're magic.
17.7, I'll bet
Do
you.
you think you get to 17?
I'll bet you. Also, take that sway bar down.
Okay, so it's oversteering for you.
Yeah, I like cars that are super stable so I can haul ass.
Yeah.
And if this one wants to, it's on the curves. I like the curves.
Okay.
Is it turn 3 on the Especially in the back.
Okay.
If I had a knob, I'd add more rebound in the rear.
Okay.
And maybe the front too.
Because a lot of the guys run MCS out here because of that.
Yeah.
Soak it up.
MCS is a good brand.
Really?
Yeah. And also, is it 9 that leads onto that?
Onto the short straight, going downhill.
Yeah, you got to hit that abrupt curve and it
Yeah, it doesn't like that.
And I have to lift and I don't want to.
Yeah.
But it's too risky to just man it.
Yeah.
I'm not young enough to be that stupid. So we're giving up some time there.
Okay.
And then the car just won't stop anymore. The first lap, it just stopped so much better.
Because of the tires.
I'm assuming it's the tires.
Yeah.
Probably has some good track pad.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it just wouldn't stop.
Okay.
Like it did at the very beginning.
Yeah.
On the outlap, I immediately noticed the thing was loose.
Okay.
You'll see me on the video. I'm talking to the camera. I'm like, not a lot, but enough that I couldn't trust it to like flat over the curb.
Yeah.
It wanted to spring loose. I would recommend controlling that with more shock damping, especially in the back.
Okay.
Believe it or not, you don't think you want to make it stiffer, right?
No.
But the spring's compressing and then it's leaping it off uncontrolled.
And the rebound would take some of that out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If you go too far, then it'll be snappy again, but for a different reason. But you won't feel it extend.
Pop out.
You won't feel it rebound and the rear suspension movement. It'll just bounce right off, hard and flat. It's not doing that.
Okay.
It's soft enough that it compresses and it's rebounding too fast.
Okay.
In the back.
Because they put higher spring rates in this car. Yeah, and so some of the guys are putting MCS with even higher spring rates, but I think they're doing that mainly because they're putting more downforce on the car as well.
Maybe, if you had enough.
Yeah. What about the camber? Do you think that some of the braking is too much camber?
No.
Okay, so the camber felt good.
Camber's good.
Okay.
These things love that.
Yeah.
How much you got?
3.5 in the front, 3 in the back.
They love that.
Okay.
Leave it.
Okay.
In addition to the setup changes that Randy suggested, I also wanted to get some more downforce. I've been driving on the track now for about a year with the 992 GT3 RS in the mix, and it's apparent that if you have more downforce, you can get around the carousel, the S's, and turn 2 at COTA faster. So I wanted to flirt with that and start playing with driving a car with more downforce and see if I can actually exploit it. Initially, I was watching the drivers of the 992 GT3 RSs, and they weren't able to exploit the downforce. But as the year went on, more and more of the drivers are learning how to use it, becoming more comfortable with it, and they're now starting to exploit it. I kind of want to play with that and see if I can exploit the downforce as well. The Then lastly, I wanted to modify my exhaust system. I've been running with a set of Soul over-axle pipes that helped with the power quite a bit, but now I want to take the next step, get more power, and improve the sound a lot. It's 9,000 RPM engine. I did a video on it. I really like the sound of the Dundon crack pipe. I'm not going to go that far, but I definitely wanted to get better sound and more power out of the exhaust, and so have been exploring the exhaust system modifications for quite a while, and I wanted to take a step in that direction. So as I discussed before, the first package that I thought of was the Manthey setup. I like the fact that it was warranted by Porsche. It was installed by Porsche. You had access to the Manthey guys in Germany through the Porsche dealership. It seemed like a nice package. It included the suspension changes that I wanted and include the Aero changes that I wanted. I have to go to somebody else for the exhaust. They didn't do any modifications on that, but it just seemed like a good package. After talking to the dealership locally, I quickly came to the conclusion that they didn't have any understanding of the setup for the track. They didn't really know much about what Manthey was providing for a setup. And after asking multiple times, what is the setup? How much camber are they going to put in the car? I never got a good answer. So I went over to Germany. I was at the ring. I was driving on the ring, and I stopped by the Manthey headquarters. So I started asking questions about their setup and started asking questions about their front splitter. You look at the front splitter, it looks like a factory splitter, but it all happens underneath. So I asked him, can I look at some of the parts? And he didn't really have any example parts or anything. So it just seemed like it was a really difficult company to work with. They're on the other side of the ocean. They're in a different time zone. If the dealership can't give me access to them and they won't answer the questions even when you're standing there with cash in hand, it just didn't seem like the right choice for me. So this led me to Dundon. They already had spent a couple years engineering a complete solution for the 4RS that included the exhaust, the suspension, and Aero. They also were very open about their setup. They would provide the entire setup for me. They'd already driven it on multiple tracks with a pro driver, and they had everything dialed in, so I could basically do a turnkey solution. I didn't have to spend a whole bunch of track time trying to figure out the dampener settings and all that kind of stuff. So that was very appealing to me. With the help of Jamie, I made several selections. So I selected their header back system that included their V11 exhaust. It's a valved exhaust system, which is one of the key things I wanted. I wanted to be able to throttle this thing down and not make a lot of noise when I come through my neighborhood. But at the track, I wanted it to wail like a crack pipe, and this was a very good blend. It doesn't drone at all when you're on the highway if you turned it to the valves closed. And at the track, it's got the tone that you want from that 9,000 RPM engine. It also moved the cats back to where they originally were. There's two cats in the GT4 RS. One is up by the header, and one was all the way back where the particulate filter sat. And if you look at the car underneath, they have NACA ducts that feed air into cooling where the particulate filter was. And so this put the cats back in that position, which allowed them to be cooled by the airflow design that was already there by Porsche. And given the heat problems I was having underneath the car, this seemed like a very good solution. It puts out about 36 extra foot-pounds of torque, and it puts out about 30 horsepower at the peak. And you can see that the horsepower along the whole curve is improved. For the suspension, I went with their intermediate setup. This included the front tension arms, the extended tie rod ends, the adjustable sway bar end links, and the adjustable rear tie rods. So this effectively allowed me to get the caster and toe settings that I wanted, plus it allowed me to push the camber beyond negative 3.5 in the front. And in addition to that, if I decided to move from a 20-inch wheel to a 19-inch wheel, it allowed me to go from the factory 295, 305 that I had before, all the way out to a 325 in the rear. So I have that option available to me if I want to exploit that in the future. For the dampeners, I went with the MCS 3-ways with remote reservoirs and the Dundon specified springs. Everyone says the MCS solution was superior to anything else on the market. So, and I know a lot of guys on the track that are running it and they're real happy with it. They're a U.S. company. They're real easy to get service from. So that seemed like a no-brainer. And Randy also said that was a great company to work with. For Aero, I went with their complete Aero package, which included the front splitter, dive planes, and the rear wing. So this effectively takes you up to 4x the downforce of the factory car, 2x the downforce of the Manthey setup, which is pretty significant. And so when you go down the back straight at COTA, I hit about 160 miles an hour. So you would have a 1,500 pounds of downforce on the car at that speed. And entering the S's, you're doing about 120. That gives you 885 pounds of downforce entering the S's. So if you look at these numbers, it's effectively the same amount of downforce as a 992 GT3 RS. So it's kind of interesting that what you're effectively doing is building a mid-engine 992 GT3 RS with this setup. So you have the same downforce as that vehicle, but you have the better handling of the mid-engine setup. For installation, you want to go with someone that you obviously trust to tear your car apart and put it back together in a way that's going to hold up. And you really want to find someone that understands how cars that go on the track are abused and the things that break and get loose. So when they put it back together, they put it back together in such a way that it's going to hold up. And so for this project, there's 2 recommended installers in Central Texas for Dundon parts. And I went with one of those, which was at SAGA Motorsports, and that's Felix. I've run with Felix on the track for quite a while, and he's done gave me a lot of setup advice and helped me with my cars over the years. So I definitely wanted to try to convince him to do it, and I twisted his arm enough, and he accepted. So he took on this project in between, the heat of the summer when they weren't running on track that much. It's going to take some time to do this, and I wanted him to have all of the time he needed, and he wasn't rushed to get this project completed. So I was real happy that I was able to convince Felix to do this job. So with that, the deconstruction phase started. I had Felix pull all the parts off the car and put them on the ground so we could take a look at them. And here in this picture, you can see the 4 dampeners that we pulled off. You can see the SPL toe arms that we took off, and we replaced those with the Dundon ones. And then the factory tension arms that we pulled off and replaced with the Dundon version. You can also see a couple of my rotors there laying on the ground as well. Next, as we pan across, you can see some of the underbody panels and then my whole exhaust system. So you can see the factory headers, the sole overaxle pipes, which you can see took a lot of heat abuse, and then the rear exhaust. And then here you can see the fender liners that we pulled off, and then all of the Aero bits that we took off, including the rear wing, the uprights, and then, of course, all of the interior pieces to install the dampeners and internal reservoirs, and then all of the bottom plates. So here you can see now the car with everything removed. So you can see the bottom where the headers were, and where the overaxle pipes went, and then where the exhaust went. And so everything's been gutted out. Of course, the brake assemblies and everything been pulled. You can see the boots there and the sway bars detached. And then here's the front wheel well. So you can see how that got cleaned out. One of the problems we had was the rear axle boots. So you can see this one here is deformed. And it's actually got deformed enough that it started smacking the wires that came out of the electronic shocks. And it actually cut through the wires and caused a short in the suspension. The other part that failed was these cooling ducts that were in the front of the car. The front wheels, under tight turns, would actually rub against them and against they were on the inside of the wheel liner. And so under pressure, they would balloon up a little bit, and then the front wheels would come in contact with them, and they actually cut through them. So part of my cooling was just getting blown into the center of the wheel and not over to where the brakes were at. So there's been some threads on this on how you can move these more inboard by adjusting that hole that you see there and get them out of the way. And so I'm going to have to do that with this new setup. On the rear axle boot issue with them deforming, we noticed that the new GT3 axles that are coming out of the factory actually have a ring around the boot. And it felt like it was an extremely hard plastic or metal ring that kept them from deforming and smacking things on the inside of the car. So I've got the car over at the dealership right now, and they're looking at that issue. And I'm curious to see when the new axles come in, if they come in with that retainer ring around the boots, which tells me that they've had this issue for a while, and the solution is to get these rings and keep them from deforming. First parts to go on were the exhaust system, and you can see Felix carefully put all the parts together on the floor. You can see the headers. They're actually under axle pipes, so these are not over axle pipes, they're under axle pipes. You can see those on the floor. And the cats, and then finally the V11 muffler that it's going to be at the back of the car. So for me, the big things were power delivery and this delivered over 30 horsepower and over 36 foot-pounds of torque. So that was the number one thing for me. Sound was the number two thing for me, and I wanted the sound to have that wail from the 9,000 RPM engine, but I also wanted it to be able to be quieted down with the valves closed. So I wanted a valved exhaust system that didn't drone at all when the valves were closed and kept the sound down to a minimum. I've had other systems in the past that had valves on them, and I couldn't even tell the difference between the valves open and valves closed. So actually on that car, I actually left the valves open. So I actually put a screw into the vacuum tube, so the valves just stay open all the time. So I wanted there to be a distinct difference between valves closed and valves open, and this thing definitely has that. And the last priority was weight. So you can go with a titanium exhaust system that shaves a lot of weight off, but the durability of titanium over time is not good. And especially if you're going to be out in the track and you're going to have a lot of heat cycles that are very extreme heat cycles. You got titanium that's tensioned down. I've seen it crack. And so for street, yeah, I've got one of those on one of my street cars, but for the track, I'd rather have a stainless steel exhaust system. And that's what Dundon has here, is the whole thing is made out of stainless steel. So you'll see Felix first put the O2 sensors on, then he puts the headers on, and then he moves to the rear muffler and bands that whole thing down and gets it adjusted. And then he puts the cats on, and then the under axle pipes are the last thing to go on. And then you'll see him put the tips on and adjust everything, and then torque everything down at the end. So I was real happy with this system. It definitely has the sound I want, and it definitely has a drone-free, quiet exhaust sound when the valves are closed. So overall, I'm real happy with this. The only thing I didn't like was the tips were a polished stainless steel, and I'm not a big chrome guy. I think chrome is kind of out of style now. I'm more of a gunmetal guy. And after talking to Jamie and Dundon, they said, yeah, this thing's going to change color as the heat cycles build up on it. And sure enough, the first time we took it out on the track and heated it up, it started turning that gold, bronzy kind of color, which is cool. And it has, the color bands across it like you would see with that titanium part. So I think over time, as this thing ages and stuff, it's going to have a nice color to it that's not going to be that polished stainless steel or chrome look that you see in these images. So here's a shot of the V11 muffler installed. You can see the valve controller. You can see this whole unit is narrower than the factory one. So there's an open area at the end. And then it goes underneath. You can see the valve controller there, the under axle pipe past the cat, and then into the header. It's a very clean installation on that. Then if we flip it around to the other side, you can see the header, and we follow it back through the collector, the under axle pipe, the cat, and then going into the rear muffler. You can see the valve controller there. And look at how much space you have on the end there. Okay, so the one problem we do have is the clearance with the under axle pipe and the axle itself. So when the suspension's in full droop, you can see they actually touch. When the suspension's loaded, we shouldn't have a problem. But you can see that if you were on something like the Nürburgring and you were getting unweighted, these two would actually touch each other. I don't jump this car, so hopefully I'm not going to have a problem. We're going to have to monitor that. As you come underneath here, you can see how tight they are and how it touches. Here's Felix with the bumper cover off. He's already removed the air curtains that were on the side from the factory. You can see the 4 holes that are there in the bumper cover. And now he's going to use those to align the dive planes to the bumper cover. So the dive planes are actually put on with 3M double-sided adhesive tape. And the studs that go through those 4 holes go into stiffening plates on the inside, and they're just used to align the dive planes. The dive planes are not bolted on. They're just stuck on with double-sided 3M tape. Yeah, because it's got to follow that angle.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go here. Putting them on is gonna be...
Because if it doesn't follow the angle perfectly, then the adhesion won't work.
Yep.
And that might have been Maverick's problem with the set that he bought.
There we go. Oh, this one you could feel when it
snapped in.
Yeah. don't like it. Yeah, the carbon stuff is just never, it's just never super precise. Like on our cars, you could always tell where one of them likes to locate a bit differently.
Yeah, and the other thing is that plastic is not perfect either, that you're mounting it to. So, so here's a test fit of the front splitter. So this thing produces hundreds of pounds of downforce, and that downforce is held by these brackets here. So you've seen pictures of these things being stood on by multiple people. And so these brackets are strong enough to hold that much weight, hundreds of pounds, which is the amount of downforce this thing generates. So it basically splits the air going above the car and below the car and accelerates the air going underneath the car to produce a lower pressure pocket and downforce. But the real magic's on the backside. You can see there's a tunnel here. And this tunnel is a front diffuser that enhances that air going underneath the car, accelerates it even more as it expands into the suspension area, and produces even more downforce. So in this diagram, you can see the difference between a flat sheet of carbon being used as a splitter on the right, and then a splitter with a built-in tunnel or diffuser on the left. And so the low air pressure pocket, or the low air pressure, is the blue area there. And then the higher pressure you can see on the front of the tire where the air is getting bunched up on the front of the tire. And then you can see the air guide down the center of the diffuser. So what that should do is line up with the edge of your tire and give a place for the air to expand into without slamming into the tire. And that enhances that downforce, so that low air pressure pocket. And then you can see on the other side of that air guide, the air hits the tire and gets ejected out the side of the car. And so that's where, basically you want that air guide lined up with the edge of your tire, and some of the air gets ejected out and some of the air goes right into the big open cavity through your suspension. So if you look at the difference between the two, you can see with the diffuser, you get a lot more of the blue. You get a blue in front of the diffuser, and then you get a blue across the front edge of the splitter, and that's enhanced because the diffuser is increasing the speed of that air going underneath the splitter. And then the carbon sheet, you just get the air, you get the low air pressure pocket on the front of the splitter. You don't get anything underneath it. So that's why you want to find a splitter with a built-in diffuser or air tunnel in it. And that's what I was trying to find with the Manthey. Manthey didn't show me what they had. The pictures I saw looked like it was a flat sheet of carbon, but I think they're smarter than that. So I think they must have a tunnel in there somewhere, but I couldn't get them to show it to me. So now as you see from the front, as we move underneath this, you can see how there's a lip right there where it scoops air that goes underneath the car, and then it accelerates into these tunnels, and these tunnels then open up and produce more downforce. So it actually helps to accelerate the air coming over the front leading edge of that. Here's Felix reinstalling the front bumper cover. You can see how the top part of the splitter is already mounted to the bumper cover, kind of like the original factory splitter. And then below that comes this big carbon plate that fits up underneath. You can see him locating that and putting it on now. He did test fit it here, and then he realized that he got a bracket that wasn't quite right. So he had to tear the whole thing apart and redo that bracket and then put the whole thing back together. But he says now that he understands this process and has it all mounted, he says he can take that bottom piece of the splitter off in about 2 minutes. So he needs to teach me how to do that next, and then I should be able to get to the lower parts of the front of the car in a couple minutes by removing that bottom splitter. I was kind of concerned it would be like taking off the front bumper cover and it would take like an hour or something. But he said, no. He said it's really easy to take this thing off, a couple bolts, and then you just pull it out of the locators and away you go. So it sounded like a better design than I originally thought it might be. Next, he installed the uprights for the rear wing. And these are very tall parts. The wing is at about the height of the roof line. So if you look at some of the pictures, and including the pictures that I had of the other car, the uprights were made out of carbon fiber, and the mounting plates that were on the rear deck were also carbon fiber. So apparently I heard through the grapevine that Dundon had some problems with the cosmetic aspects of the carbon for those. And they went back and forth with the manufacturer of them, and they eventually went to aluminum uprights. And so when my kit came to me, it actually had the aluminum uprights and not the carbon uprights. The aluminum uprights are the same thing that was in the factory design. With the Visoc package, you got a lot of carbon. It kind of looks nice to have the carbon. I was kind of excited about that. But the aluminum ones are stronger. They're heavier as well, though. But they do have that factory look in the sense that they are aluminum, and that's what the factory shipped. So I'm okay with it. The wing is carbon, and that's what the factory wing had as well. It was a aluminum upright, carbon wing, and that's what this kit came to me with. So overall, I think it's a good cosmetic look, so I'm okay with it. Okay, next, Felix mated the massive wing onto the uprights. You can see how it's a hollow core piece of carbon. It's a very low drag design, and it does not require a gurney flap. So you look at this thing and it doesn't have a gurney flap, and everyone, oh, hey, if you put a gurney flap on there, you get more downforce. Well, with this design, you get all the downforce without the need for that extra spoiled edge on the back of some of the wings. So the end caps are also interesting in that they have a curvature to them that helps with the downforce coming out the back. So overall, it's a very elegant looking design.
Hey guys, this is where we currently stand. We are on like day 4 or 5 of this car. I'm doing it here and there. The full exhaust is installed. This time it's an under axle pipe from Dundon. Most of the kit here is from Dundon. The suspension is ready to go in. Installed the rear toe arm. On the front side, I installed the thrust arm, measured the toe length, so it should be somewhere somewhat in the stock location. And yeah, shocks ready to go in. Put this beautiful splitter on. Once the suspension goes in, we may have to tweak some V-bands and stuff like that. In these cars, once you start doing a few aftermarket components, you kind of have to make sure that everything is just happy with each other. On the rear of the car has a cage, so sometimes you have to pull the cage. Hopefully we get lucky. Yeah, let's get it. The rear of the car looks absolutely cool with those tips, and I think those tips will actually gain some color with the heat. I know they're chrome is long gone, but I think Dundon might have done that because they're probably going to turn gold with the heat. So yeah, the muffler looks great. Everything so far is fitting great, but like I said, there's going to be tweaks at the end just to make sure components are all happy with each other, like this here. Initially I didn't put this V-band bolt, I didn't put it on the top side because I didn't know if we're gonna have like a tire clearance problem. It's probably gonna have to move to the top. This one I put it on the bottom, and this one I know is 100% set, so I put it up top. But this one, me putting the toe link in, I was like, ooh, we'll see what happens. Other thing I did is I did get the MCS transferred to the OEM uprights. That's the MCS suspension. I had to do a few things like Loctite. They were already staked. These are 2 stake nuts. That's what it's called. It's basically 2 nuts that are sandwiched on each other. Took the top nut off, did Loctite, measured collars. That way we start with a consistent right head throughout the car. The fronts are basically bottomed out all the way. Installed new front axle lift lines. I think other small stuff, but yeah, this is basically ready to go in the car. Crazy excited to see this thing back together. Well, it looks amazing in pieces, but yeah. So let's start by throwing a front right corner on the car, and we will take it from there. From here we'll move to the rear. I think the rear is going to be more involved. As you guys can see in the background, a ton of boxes. Hopefully I'll do some cleaning up tonight, start boxing up all the stock stuff, and then seeing what else aftermarket we have. Like I said, most of the stuff is already installed. One thing about sphericals, or changing the car to mostly sphericals, is like this arm, right? If this was a rubber bushing, you would have to put tension on the suspension before you tighten it, because if you tighten it on a hanging position, first of all, you're not gonna even be able to move it and connect it. But you'll have to put force on the suspension, tighten it, because if not, like I said, you won't be able to do this to it, so you won't be able to connect it to the suspension. But you will cause premature wear on the bushing. So putting sphericals, I like if you just throw them in, tighten them down, and then you marry them to the car. As you see, they have a ton of movement, and it's obviously gonna give him better feedback through the steering wheel. Let's start the time lapse.
So one of the big motivations for doing this transformation was to get on MCS suspension. So with the stock suspension going over the curbs at COTA, I was getting tossed around. I was getting thrown to the side to where the car just felt completely upset. And so I didn't feel comfortable with that. I watched Randy do it. Randy came back and said that he didn't feel comfortable doing that. So I knew it wasn't in my mind. It was actually something that was really bad for the behavior of the car. And I watched the guys with the MCS suspensions, and they just went right over the top of that stuff, just totally unfazed by the curbs and the being tossed around. So I knew that I needed to get on that. I had a lot of cars with KW suspension, and they worked pretty well. I didn't have a good connection to the company, so I didn't know what the settings were. I just kind of found them empirically by dialing things around and stuff. So going to a company like MCS that was in the US and having a direct connection to that company and be able to get some settings from them. Dundon already has people in the field getting those values, so I've got a lot of places to pull from to get the correct settings for these. So that felt good. Also, in the past, I've had a car with JRZ suspension, and that was phenomenal. I was totally spoiled by it.
I first got onto JRZ shocks with Mike Levitus's TPC Racing, and it was almost 10 years ago. And that relationship was a winner right from the beginning.
It turns out that the guys from JRZ are the guys that started MCS, so that made me feel really good too, that the best feeling suspension that I had was the same lineage as this stuff. So overall, I felt really good about that decision. So here's a shot of the front suspension components installed. You can see the tension arm there. It's square, so the cooling clamshells that clamp onto it will fit. You can see the remote reservoir lines going out of the MCS and then the camber plate at the top of the MCS dampener. So here's a shot of the rear suspension installed. You got the adjustable sway bar end link there. The sway bars were eventually set to soft. It was a medium in this picture. And then you can see the MCS suspension coming up into the rear camber plate. And so I had to replace all the camber plates on this car. Here we are getting close. We got the front splitter on. We've got the MCS in. The brakes are back in place. The rear suspension's in place. The rear brakes are back in place. The exhaust is on, and the rear wing is mounted. So it's time for turn the key over and see what this thing sounds like. Here's some shots of the Aero elements. You can see there's an end cap on the front splitter that you can remove. And I actually removed that when I put it into the trailer, so I have a little more clearance on the sides. And then the front splitter, you can see it all installed there. And it's a really very nice, elegant design. I really like it. I like the strength of it too. It's amazing. And you can see the end cap there and how it splits up there. There's a good shot of the end cap there. And so if you take those off, you get probably another 3 inches of clearance on either side if you want to get up into a trailer. And you can see the piece where we took the air curtain off and we had to patch the PPF on that. And then the dive planes locate on those studs. There's the bottom. You can see the rubber pucks that protect it from the ground. There's an air guide there in the middle. And you can see the titanium pucks on the front there. So you got quite a bit of protection. You can see how the front splitter comes out wider than everything else on the car. That's why I was kind of concerned about putting it up into a trailer. And when I gave it to the dealership, I took those off too. So people that are not used to driving the car will have the normal clearance. Rear wing is massive. It's the height of the roof of a car, even though it looks kind of different there. And then you can see how the end plates are actually curved. They're not just flat end plates. And that's part of the aerodynamic element as well. No gurney flap on it. Here's the remote reservoirs in the front. You can see Felix did a great job of installing those. They slide up through those utility boxes that you can pull out from the sides, so it doesn't have to cut into the carpet. There's the rebound adjustment on the top, and the stake bolts have been marked. And then he used a different canister mount. I'll put a link to that. He prefers these over the ones that are provided. So here's a shot of the rear reservoir install. Same mounts. You can see he just cut a couple little holes in the carpet there to get the lines through. You can see the high-speed, low-speed compression adjustments there on the inside on both of them. So super easy to get to those. And then if you go up on top of the shock tower, you've got the rebound adjustment. That one's kind of buried in there a little bit. We're looking at getting a remote version of that to make a line that flexes out so we can get to it easier. After the car was finished up at SAGA, Felix then took the car over to Blacksheep, and Blacksheep specializes in the alignments of these cars. So They're another Dundon preferred installer in Central Texas. The guy that Felix introduced me to was Mike. He's the owner of the shop. He's the one that does all of the alignments for Felix's cars, so I was very curious to see what his alignments would look like. He understands the adjustability of all the Dundon suspension components, so he knew how to dial this thing in. He got the caster dialed back into where we wanted it, and then we looked at the Dundon setup sheets, and they were actually running less camber in the front and the rear than what we were running. So we went ahead and took the values that we had before and pulled the front camber back a little bit. So we went down to negative 3.6 in the front. And then in the rear, we matched what we had in the front. We kind of pulled off usually a half a degree. And so we ended up with negative 3 in the back. So that's still a lot more camber than what Dundon was running, but they run on a different track than we run on. We actually did some checks on the temperatures of the tires, and we found the 3.6 was good. It actually could use 3.7 on one side, which is the side we push the hardest on. And then in the back, we actually had too much at negative 3. So we might pull some of that back out now that we've looked at the tire temperatures. The toe, we kept the toe the same. So we have negative 1.2 in the front and we got positive 3.5 in the rear. We changed all the parts, but we went ahead and just set up the same toe that we had already. In the ride height, it's slightly lower than factory, because we wanted to give the front splitter some clearance out at COTA. I didn't want to be dragging that thing on the ground at the beginning. The downforce increases exponentially with the ride height. So if you can lower it a little bit, you'll get a ton more downforce. So we started at a pretty conservative place, and then we can slowly lower it down. The first time we took it out on track, when we went into turn 12 and hammered the brakes, the titanium pucks would smack the ground, so with the nosedive. So something to watch. I don't think it's going to wear that much, but we'll have to watch and see on that. Overall, I was real happy with Mike, and we got the car back, and then we took it over to Bespoke. They were the guys that did the paint protection on the car originally. You can see in the area on the front bumper cover where the air curtain was, there was an exposed piece of paint because there was no PPF on that. So they had to patch up that area of PPF with the satin PPF and then cut through that to get down to the paint where the dive plane was going to adhere to the bumper cover. And then they had to put an adhesive promoter on the dive plane and then bond that to the bumper cover. So they got all that taken care of. They had to custom cut pieces of PPF to go over the front splitter because there are no templates for that. And I had problems with the 7 mil PPF. I actually punctured through that. I went through a layer of clear, a layer of PPF, and then into the clear coat on the front bumper from a rock that flew off of the back straight. So knowing that, I would have put 10 mil on the hood. So I had them put 10 mil on the front splitter. And then only on the real curvy parts did we go back to 7 mil. So now I have a blend of 10 mil and 7 mil on those parts. But the front splitter is going to take a beating. It's down there low. There's all kinds of rubber and rocks and things that are flying up on the track. So having 10 mil out there is going to be very helpful. With that, we loaded the car up into the trailer and took it off to COTA for its first outing. Dundon actually flew in their pro driver, Ted. Super thankful that they did that. He was the test driver for all the parts. He understands the settings. He knows what the car should feel like. So he showed up at the track on the first session and took the car out, shook it down, got everything, dialed in the way he wanted it, explained to me the way the car should feel, and confirmed that it felt correct with the way we had it set up. And then he put me in the car and set me off to start learning how to use the Aero and how to use the new suspension. So that was a far cry from, you think about Manthey, where they wouldn't even answer questions about the stuff, to Dundon actually sending their pro driver out to meet me at the track and shake the car down on the first session and help me get it dialed in. Unbelievable customer service. It was great. More videos on that coming. Some great time on the track, and I definitely have a steep learning curve to try to figure out how to use this Aero now. I'm in the same boat that all the 3 RS guys are. We'll catch you on the track next time.